Assalamu alaikum. I'm Ahmed O'Keefe, host of the NYCMC Business Incubator's virtual business program. Of course, you know the NYCMC. It's a 501c3 nonprofit organization, home to one of the fastest growing Muslim communities in New York City, with various branches, including the Isa ibn Maryam Masjid, the FCAD Institute, the Wellspring School, full-time school for children, the NYCMC Foster Care program, the NYCMC Angels doing COVID relief, the Hatebusters, a national anti-islamophobia campaign, and of course, the Incubator Program. The Incubator Program's goal is to provide the mentorship, expertise, and network needed to help new and amplify current entrepreneurs. This virtual business program is aimed to help us sharpen our skills and business knowledge. It is a 10-week program. Tonight is session 3. Our speakers tonight will present for about 40 minutes, and we'll have about 20 minutes at the end for questions. Please provide your questions throughout the session in the YouTube chat, and we will do our best to answer them as they come in. Next week, we are moving to Tuesday at 6 p.m. Check your email for the link on that a little earlier, but also you can see our entire schedule in email sent to you a little earlier in this week. So please check that email for the full schedule. Tonight, we have 2 attorneys speaking with us. Zubair Dawood, a Florida licensed attorney, University of Florida law graduate with several years experience advising businesses of all sizes. His focus is on estate planning and business consulting. His partner, Siraj Sohail, is also a Florida licensed attorney, cum laude graduate from Cooley Law School. He has years experience in business law, estate planning, regulatory compliance, immigration, and nonprofits. Formerly a clerk with IRS Office of Chief Counsel, his practice focuses now on business law, estate planning, immigration, and nonprofits. They'll be discussing Make It Right from the Start, how to assess the legal framework and other considerations you need to review as you start a new business. Brothers, please go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I first want to thank NYCMC for having us today, and thank you, Brother Ahmed, for the nice introduction. We appreciate it very much. On behalf of Dawood Sohail Law, we want to welcome everyone to this portion of the presentation called Make It Right from the Start. And kind of what our goal was is to set up some questions and some food for thought for any individual who is looking to set up a business. When you're doing so, it's important to kind of have some of these questions in mind, because it'll help you navigate the initial setup process, which can actually make things a lot easier for you in the present and in the future. So we wanted to kind of begin with a list of questions so we can kind of have a nice discussion today. So the first question was, what business structure should I choose? Then we would want to discuss, how do I choose a name for my company? How do I minimize risk? Do I need corporate documents? If we do, what should be in those documents? Do we need business contracts? How can I protect my IP or intellectual property? How do I keep my business compliant with state and federal regulations? And what does the road ahead and growth look like for us? And lastly, is there any benefit of getting legal counsel in the beginning, throughout the duration of the business? And so those are those initial considerations that we wanted to just lay out. That's the roadmap that we're trying to cover today, inshallah. So let's get right into it. Let's start looking at business structure. So I don't like to just do a plain lecture format. So what I'd like to do is kind of try to be as conversational as I can be and kind of give examples. So it helps, make situations a little bit easier to understand. So if I'm initially starting a business, one of the most important questions is, how should I organize my business? Should I be a corporation? Should it be a joint venture? Should it be a partnership? Should I just be a sole proprietor? Should I form a limited liability company? And if I do that, should it be multi-member? Should it be single member? Though there's a lot of questions that come up in just the beginning stages. And for us, the main focus is we want to limit our liability. One of the main things we want to focus and do is limit our liability, because God forbid a situation ever occurs where we are getting sued, we want to make sure that we are protected, and none of our individual assets or properties are at risk. And so that's kind of the framework that we want to build off of. So the first thing is, so what's a sole proprietorship? What does that mean? A sole proprietor is basically if I set up just a company. There's no formal way to actually do that. You just begin trading as a company. You may have to get professional certain licenses, but you just begin as a company. And that's great for some people because you have no startup costs. There's no cost whatsoever to do that. You may want to, if you're not doing the business as your own name, you may want to get what they call a DBA. So it's called doing business as. You have to file for that. But beyond that, the startup is very easy. What's the drawback to having just being a sole proprietor? It means that you take on all the risk and all the liability. So God forbid that a situation arises and you get sued, or they're coming after you and your assets. And that's one of those things that we want to avoid. So I say for sole proprietor, we may want to, tread with caution there. Partnerships is maybe Siraj and I, we're working together. We have a law firm together. If Siraj and I were doing a different business and we wanted to just become a general partnership, we could do that. And again, there's not really any process that really needs to be involved as such. We could start our business out and start as a general, that Siraj and I both be general partners. But again, we look at liability in these situations.
So Zubair, I have a quick question to ask. Suppose you and I, we decide to just start up a partnership. We have coffee, like starting a law firm is a good idea, and we jump right into the law firm, and we don't follow any other formalities, and we go into business together. Am I liable in the course of our law firm if there's a mistake on your part? Do I become personally liable? Like talking about liability and how liability works?
Yeah, so we'll all be liable together. Because as a general partnership, we would all be on the hook, because there's not going to be anything that separates us from any liability that's coming in, and that's a perfect segue for us. So that's why they've developed corporations, these formal entities. And the most famous, I think everybody knows, is as a corporation, a C corp. Like majority of the big companies, that's what their structure setup is. And so why doesn't everyone just become a corporation? And that's a good question. And again, the answer that a lot of attorneys always seem to use is it depends. It always depends on your unique set of circumstances. A corporation is great if you want that business structure, that very formal type structure wherein you have management through a board of directors, and you like the formalities of having minutes, and you want annual meetings. There's certain corporate formalities that are part and parcel of a corporation, particularly a C corp, that make it very appealing to some people that like a very structured type entity that's not very fluid. And the beauty about a corporation is that there's the law for corporations has been going on and on and on for a long, long time. So it's not a new type of business entity that there's not much case law and there's not much information about that. But there are some drawbacks of a C corp. One of the drawbacks of a C corp is that there's something called double taxation that you have with the C corporation. And what that is that when there's profit or when there's funds that are earned by the corporation, there's an initial tax that's paid on that. When then those profits go down to the shareholders, maybe in the form of a dividend or some form of distribution. Those shareholders, then they have to pay tax on that again. So there's a double taxation. So the question is there a structure of a corporation that I can get that same structure and that familiarity that I have with the corporation, but can I get that without those tax consequences? And the answer is yes. There's an election called an S corp election. An S corp election allows you to have it's called what's called a flow through tax. So if there's profit that's earned, it goes through to the shareholders, and the shareholders get taxed once. So you must say, this must be the dream then. This must be everything that we're looking for. And it may be, but there's some things that you do need to know. And some of the things that you need to know is that with an S corp, there's some limitations. Where in the C corp, you're allowed different tiers of stock. We're probably all familiar that there's something called common stock, there's preferred stock, there's different levels. With an S corp, there's only one level of stock. That's one thing.
So,
The other thing is,
if you don't want me to chime in, what's the drawback of only having one level of stock?
well, it just depends based upon the company structure. If you just want to have one level, sometimes way the preferred stock works out, it actually works different, especially when it comes to like dissolution. So preferred stock, they get their money first before another set of common stockholders. So there's a hierarchy that you don't really necessarily have. So it allows a little bit better for, especially when like someone's going public or a corporation is raising funds, they can appropriate certain levels of stock to raise funds in that, and they can sell the stock in that at that level. So that's kind of could be an issue in an S corp. And then one of the other things with an S corp is you're limited in who you can have as a shareholder, and by that I mean it's limited to legal residents of the U.S. and and to U.S. citizens. So if there's someone that's of the foreign background that wants to be a shareholder in S corp, that's going to make it difficult. So then you'd have to look at C corp, or you'd have to look at potentially a different entity. And that gives us a good segue to our next entity type, and which is I would say the entity of choice these days for attorneys, and that's called the limited liability company. And this is a company, this entity structure has become very, I guess, popular in the 2000s. Prior to the 2000s, you didn't hear much about it, and there's even in the early 2000s there wasn't much case law. It was something very, very new. And the thing with the limited liability company is flexible. So you don't, whereas on the corporation side you have that very rigid almost set of management structure for the formation is very strict. With a limited liability company, it's not. And the thing with limited liability companies, you don't have shareholders, you have members. So members are who own the interests in a limited liability company. And the beauty about a limited liability company is you don't create like tiers like you do for a corporation. You can make something member manage or manager manage. And so what the beauty about that certain structure is, you can have members that are almost silent in a sense, and they can just be the ones who actually own the company. And then you can have a different set of managers who actually run the company. And those managers can bind the company and they can do whatever needs to be done, but the members are the ones who maintain that membership interest, that ownership. So it's kind of unique in that respect. And it doesn't have the formalities, and you don't need, as long as you draft the operating agreement correctly, you don't need to have annual meetings. You don't have to have minutes. And again, these are the type of flexibilities that, especially when you're starting up, you may or may not necessarily want to have those rigid procedures to be involved. And the question with multi-member and single member.
Before we move forward, I have one quick question. I
Sure.
know in the corporation, you mentioned one drawback of the corporation was that if you don't structure it right, there's potentially you can be taxed two different times. Is that a concern, being taxed at two different levels in a limited liability company too?
No, that's the other beauty about a limited liability company. Thanks for asking that, Siraj. So a limited liability company, again, that's a flow-through entity. So with a limited liability company, you can be just taxed at one time the same way as an S corp. And the beauty about a limited liability company, say you wanted to go wild and you wanted to elect to be taxed as a C corp, you can do that with a limited liability company. Limited liability company, you just make an election. So you can elect to be taxed as a C corp. You can elect to be taxed as an S corp. And that's actually what a lot of limited liability companies do. They like the certain taxation of an S corp because there comes issues with a limited liability company and paying self-employment tax. And those are the things that you can minimize if you elect an S corp and you're paying yourself a salary. There's certain criteria there. And that's why it's also important to kind of have a discussion of where do you see your company going. That's a good conversation to have with an attorney and with a CPA, because they'll be able to help you navigate that structure to kind of fit what's best for you. Because sometimes in the early stages, you don't need to be you don't need that S corp election as a limited liability company. Maybe in the first initial years, everything is fine, just processing as a partnership, because you don't have you may not meet that threshold amount where you want to pay a salary to the members every month. So when we were discussing, we're talking about a multi-member of a single member, and the question is, why would you bring that up? And the reason is because Siraj and I, we're licensed in Florida, and so there's a case in Florida that kind of changed the dynamics of the multi-member, single-member LLC structure for as far as liability protection, and that case was called the Olmstead case. And the reason why we bring that up is because it kind of separated out liability protection for single member versus multi-member LLCs. And so that's why it's also very important to see if there's any issues in your state with single member versus multi-member. In that Olmstead case, the court held that there was another remedy besides providing a charging order against the member's interest for a single member. And what the charging order is, it's basically a lien on a member's interest. So if there was any distributions that were paid out to that member, that the person who had the lien against an interest would be entitled to those funds. So that was the sole remedy initially for liability as far as LLC is concerned. However, in that Olmstead case, the court allowed an additional remedy where they were allowed to attach to the assets of the entity. And that is a huge thing, because under the normal doctrine, that wasn't allowed to happen. The remedy was very limited in scope. It was limited just to that lien on the membership interest. And that is something that made a limited liability company so promising, and it was something that everybody wanted to use, because you had this protection, you had such a limited scope of how liability was how your liability was imposed on a member. And that's why it changed the landscape. And that's why we advise our clients here in Florida that, to kind of stay clear right now for single member LLC, because it could potentially cause danger to your assets, and we don't want that.
And this is something, sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
So I was just saying that these are considerations that it's always good to have in the back of your mind. Okay, if we can do it this way, and this is going to avoid a potential liability in the future, that's the best way. Forward thinking is always the best. It's always going to help. It's going to always help to ensure that you protect your assets and protect your personal assets as well. Siraj, what were you going to say?
No. I think you brought it up.
Oh, and so then the second question comes to, where should I organize my business? And I think there's been a lot of discussion about should we incorporate, or should we form in Delaware? Should we organize in New York, or should we organize internationally? And initially, Delaware was the state where everybody wanted to organize or incorporate their corporation. And the reason is because they were business friendly and they were corporate friendly. They had laws that would protect corporations in Delaware. So rightfully so, everybody was like, well, you know what? If Delaware is a place that I need to be to have that full protection, I'm going to go to Delaware. And because states get revenue from when you file, and they get filing fees, and they get annual fees every year, states started catching on. They said, hey, well, everyone seems to be, forming in Delaware. We're losing out on this revenue. So a lot of states started changing their corporate statutes to kind of be more business friendly and business oriented like Delaware, so that they could attract more people to form their entities in that particular state. And the question becomes also, you have to look at it, where are you doing business as well? So if I live in Florida, but I'm strictly going to be doing business in Georgia, does it necessarily make sense that I form in Florida? Not unless there's a particular specific reason. If Florida had a state tax, maybe, then I would want to file in Georgia for a particular reason. But if all my business is in Georgia, and that's where my license is going to be, there's nothing preventing us from forming in Georgia. So those are some of the considerations that you want to look at. One of the other considerations is,
May I step in for 1 second, Zubair?
Sure.
So we did have a question in the chat asking if we knew anything that was addressing the multi-member LLC topic you brought up with Homestead. Whether you knew the outcome in New York City. And I think, I don't know if you gave the clarifying question. I know I gave it the first time that I spoke and introduced myself because I'm also a Florida attorney. And first of all, none of us, I don't think you guys know the answer to what happens in New York. I certainly don't. And we're not here to, certainly I'm not here to offer you any legal advice. I think the biggest takeaway you're going to get from this is to realize some of the levels of complexity that are going on here, and the fact that you will want to consult with an attorney to review your individual situation. I don't know if you guys know, though, the answer for New York.
I do not know the answer for New York.
And
so one, I think, let me take one step back, because that is my initial opening was supposed to start with a proviso, and I think I got too excited and I jumped the gun. So let me rewind for 1 second and let me give that proviso that this presentation is strictly for educational purposes. This is in no way, shape, or form for us to offer any sort of legal advice to anybody. This is just for pure educational purposes and to help everyone start that thinking process. And as the brother Ahmed said, that one of the most important things is to get your mind thinking and seek competent counsel for your own unique situation. And that, I think I should have began with it. Again, I think I got too excited, so I jumped the gun. So I wanted to let me put that proviso out there. So again, this is just for educational purposes only.
Thank you. Now, sorry to interrupt you. I think you were on silent versus active owners or somewhere along those lines.
Yes, perfect. Thanks, Brother Ahmed. So, and this is another consideration to be made. So when you're looking at this business structure, are we looking to have someone who's going to be an active participant in running the business, and then we're going to have someone who's actually silent and they're just going to be providing funding? Sometimes there's that different structure. For example, Siraj and I were starting a new business. I don't have the capital to start that business, but Siraj, alhamdulillah, he has the capital to start it. So I tell Siraj, I said, hey,
but just
Siraj,
for the record, that's a fully hypothetical situation, just for the record.
So Siraj has the capital to fund the business. I said, Siraj, look, if you fund this business, you can be a silent partner. And what I'll do is I'll be the active partner, and I'll do everything on the day-to-day business to run the company. Siraj trusts me enough to keep his money or to invest his money. So Siraj invests into this idea, and Siraj becomes a silent partner, and I become an active partner. That's an important structure to know, because if that's something you're looking at, then we can go in two different ways. So that could also be a corporation could fit that structure. That limited liability company could fit that structure. We could have Siraj as being a member, and I could be a manager of the limited liability company. See, there's different ways you can skin that cat. Then you have to look at it this way. Okay, so say, for example, we're looking that later down the line, I definitely want to raise funds. That's a big thing, that we want to raise funds, and we definitely want to look at being a publicly traded company. So then we need to look, okay, well, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not necessarily feasible in a limited liability company. Unless you're in the energy sector, a limited liability company is not going to be the business entity for you for that particular reason. And that's why you would want to look more closely at the C Corp. See, those ideas are very important to have in the beginning, because it could have consequences if you need to change down the line. And if you're growing so well, it could have severe tax consequences. For example, there was a client of ours that was, they've been a C Corp, and they've been a business since the 80s. And, they're a C Corp, so they're getting double taxed every single year. And they've been doing that since the 1980s. And, the reason was there was no LLC stuff back then. There was no entity structure that was easy for them back then. And so, we looked at it together, and we said, well, what would be the consequences for them to convert to an LLC? So we got on, we were working with their CPA, and it turned out that for them to actually convert to an LLC, they would have to almost liquidate their business, and they had significant assets. So the tax consequences to convert to a LLC was huge. And so these are very important things to think about going forward.
So this business is just staying in a double taxation situation right now? It's just easier to stay in that double taxing as opposed to switching over?
Yep. They're better off right now because the tax consequence would be so major that any gain they would get later on a potential sale wouldn't make sense. They're better off just hoping that tax rates stay low for a corporation, and that that they can take benefit of that. I mean, that's the only thing they can really do. But that's the thing. See, and the unfortunate thing is they sought our counsel really late. Like if they had sought counsel as things were progressing, maybe we could have advised them earlier on or in that cycle that say, hey, let's look into this. And maybe their assets weren't as much as they were at the given point when they reached out to us, and they could have actually, got benefit from liquidating and turning into an LLC. So these are the things you want to look forward, keep forward thinking. Don't just look at, okay, what do I need right now? Just see what is your aspirations for the future, because everybody intends that their business is going to succeed and it's going to grow. So base it on that growth, because it's not going to hurt you to form an entity in the beginning. Like I said, if you want to form with the intention of becoming a publicly traded company, you can be a C corp, but in the interim, you could elect the S corp designation, and you can get certain benefits for the meantime. There are a lot of easier ways to navigate it as long as you have that forward thinking in mind. So
I may interrupt just to give you a heads up on the time.
Sure.
And where we are in the presentation.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna go. Trust me. The first section was heavy.
Just making sure.
These ones start going. These start going. Okay. Beautiful. So company name. So this is something that we all think of. So we always want to say, you want to think of something that's unique, that represents you or the company you're trying to create. You always want to avoid the common names that are used and affiliated with other businesses. You don't want to start using Apple Company or something very similar to them. That's not something you want to do. And also avoid deceptive names. Don't use a name like if you want to give some sort of tax advice, you're going to be IRS authorized taxman. You don't want to affiliate yourself with the government if you're not really affiliated and authorized with the government. You don't want to do that. That's going to get you into trouble. And
so just to chime in on that, there are rules you have to follow. If you're going to incorporate or create an LLC, there are rules which have to be followed as far as what naming conventions you follow. And you actually have to look it up beforehand. And when you're forming your entity, to certify that the name you're using is a name which is allowed to be used.
Yeah. And the thing is you, like Siraj was saying, when you research the name, remember, in most states, again, you have to check with the state, but generally speaking, the states, they don't distinguish if you make something plural, you make it possessive, you add an and, that doesn't make it different than the original name. For example, if you name something Apple, if you put apples, that's not going to be a distinguishing factor. If you say the apple, same thing, it's not going to be a distinguishing factor. Apples, apostrophe S, same thing. That's something to be cognizant of that. Don't use something that's normally used. Don't try and use anything that's trademarked. Don't do that, because you're going to end up, getting yourself in trouble for no reason whatsoever.
I would suggest also making sure it's trademarkable before you take it, because there are rules for trademarking that you might think it's a great business name, but unless you become super popular, you'll never get a trademark.
This is true.
That's true too. And so this is an important part. So we've been talking in the beginning about forward thinking and minimizing risk and liability. So there's some things to think about when actually we've set up our entity. So we've done that now. So we're in the third stage now. So we've found an entity that fits us. We've chosen a name that's not going to infringe upon Apple or any other Microsoft or any of those big companies. And so now we're thinking about, okay, how can we minimize our risk as that entity? One of the things that you can do is actually create an employee handbook. But the thing that we need to really understand is create an employee handbook that we can follow. A lot of times companies create an employee handbook and they have so many specific things in there, but they never follow them. That's not going to help you. That's going to hurt you, especially if you have. Yeah, especially if you have something that pops up with one of the employees later on down the line. So be aware of that. Next is to be cognizant of the surroundings and changes in society and the norms in society. That's important because maybe what was okay when you were growing up is not necessarily okay now. So you have to be very careful because you could find yourself in hot water because you're using certain vernacular or certain terminology that maybe when you were growing up was okay, but it is not now. So be very aware of your surroundings, be very aware of societal norms. Insurance. This is something that's very important for businesses trying to minimize their own risk. General liability insurance. It's something that's usually inexpensive depending on your field, but it's something that can help. God forbid that something happens, that somebody gets hurt, or there's something happens with another with somebody who comes into your facility. There's so many different things that could occur. And this is something that can help protect you from that. Workers' compensation, that's required for employers, but that's also something if your staff member gets hurt on the job, you want to make sure that you have that so that you are covered there. Errors and admissions.
Is a side note, Zubair. I do legal consulting with many nonprofits, and we see this many times in the nonprofit sector because everyone's tight many times in the nonprofit sector. So sometimes they don't have necessary coverages, or they don't do some of this due diligence up front. And at the tail end, it ends up costing them a lot more because for whatever reason, there's public funds which are being used or an oversight. But I've seen many people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in the nonprofit sector on issues that could have been resolved kind of proactively had they had sufficient insurance and done sufficient due diligence on hiring licensed contractors, and just generally following business protocol, which are important to follow.
Thank you, Siraj. So insurance plays an important part. Look for insurance based upon what actual business or what business you're in, and get competent legal advice on what insurance you should get. This is a big one. Classifying employees. This is something that can get you in hot water. So basically classifying your employees, whether they're exempt or non-exempt from overtime, whether they're employee or independent contractor, these are very critical parts of running a business. And you have to make sure that you follow the specific guidelines to classify an employee as a non-exempt versus an exempt employee, exempt from overtime. If somebody's improperly classified as they're exempt from overtime and they are not, and they should be non-exempt, you could be liable for back pay and overtime and other fees, and it becomes very complicated. So that is something that you have to take up front. Sometimes people think, hey, I'm going to just pay this person a salary, but that person's working 60 hours a week. If they're not classified correctly, they're entitled, even though you think you want to pay them a salary, they would be entitled to that additional overtime. So make sure that you take the time to classify employees correctly.
And kind of adding on to that, this is something which the Department of Labor, a federal agency, takes relatively seriously. There are rules and kind of regulations on how to determine if someone should be hourly or salaried, if someone should be an employee or independent contractor. And if people are not too careful about that up front, later on down the road, there could be large penalties, back pay, and just it's bad press too, to be honest. So making sure that people are classified correctly is hugely important. That I've seen, I don't know about other attorneys, that I've seen that sometimes people starting off, they don't think about it as seriously as they should, and it comes back to kind of bite them sometimes later on.
Right. And lastly, you want to make sure that you're paying your expenses and your staff before you're paying yourself. I was just watching something on Netflix the other day about, I guess, Bad Boy Billionaires or something. That was the name of it. But it's about basically a lot of the times that these moguls, they were initially paying their staff, and at some point they just stopped paying them, and they started taking the money for themselves without paying their employees, without paying their expenses. And that does catch up. And when it catches up, it comes at you hard, and there could be criminal penalties for things that you're doing. So be aware of these things. So make sure you're paying your expenses, paying your staff, and doing all those necessary things before you start paying yourself. Let's talk about corporate documents. So this is something that we can kind of peruse very quickly. So if we incorporate, do we need bylaws? Should we actually set up a operating agreement for an LLC or a partnership agreement? Do we need to have those documents? And the answer is 100% yes. And the reason being is because it sets up how your company is going to be run. So it goes down to the nitty gritty of how things should be done. And especially is important because it can account for things like estate planning. So one of the beautiful things is you can create something in an LLC where you can provide estate planning provisions in there in your operating agreement. It's important that you can do that in there. It also you can have first rights of first refusal. So for example, say you have a partner and that partner, he gets divorced, and part of the divorce settlement is she gets the shares. You can have a triggering event in that agreement that says that if there's any divorce or any incident that arises, that the other members or the other partner has the first right to buy that share. And you can even set a price at how you're going to value that company at that time, and you can buy it out, and you can protect the core of your company. So those are very important things. And we've seen all too well where we've had clients come to us and they're having disputes.
Be it people who started as good friends or even relatives. It's so no one is exempt, no matter if it's your best friend or even your brother. These things, sometimes we overlook, but I highly stress this to everyone.
Yeah, it's very important. It is very, very important. So you want to make sure that you flush it out. And it may be, even if you think that, it's like Siraj is saying, it could be a close friend, it could be a relative. You don't want to have something that could cause a division between you later on when something arises. If you have everything flushed out in the beginning and you have it in writing, it makes everything clear for all the parties involved.
Are you referring specifically to the buy-sell agreement or just in general? Because I would imagine a lot of people could get away without the buy-sell agreement for a while, especially if they don't know how to value the business yet. It is important. I agree with you, but are you referring specifically to that or other things or just in general?
Well, so let's go back. So one of the things that is not just a buy sell, it's important for that specifically. And we've actually had clients that we've done things for with valuations. So in the beginning, you can set up a generic way that you value your company. You can have that listed out in your operating agreement or in your bylaws that you specify how you want your company to be valued, and you can give it on certain time periods. So if it's in usually the company, you maybe say in the first 5 years, if it doesn't succeed, it's going to fail. So you can have certain guidelines for the initial terms and then subsequent years, right? So I think though when we've had issues arise, it's because somebody got divorced, someone died. Some other things could be where one of the members died, and now they didn't have a mechanism to transfer that over. You don't want to necessarily have the estate actually own that entity and be able to make decisions within the company. So when you have these rights of first refusals and you have these the language in there that gives the other members, the other owners, the ability to purchase out, and those types of clauses really, really help and could potentially save a company from going down. Does that make sense, Ahmed? Does that clear?
It does. I was just thinking to emphasize the importance of, and I know you said it, it's just the emphasis, right? Emphasizing the importance of understanding your governing documents, how the governance of the business will happen. As you said, people are friendly, and I've also seen it turns really nasty when it comes down to money.
Yep.
And the governing documents will govern, and that's going to happen. So you understand them at the very least,
right?
Yeah, and that's it. Like you said, it's like almost like a memorial of understanding between the parties. And the other thing with it is just a blueprint for how you want to run the business. It's the blueprint of how you want to do things. How are we gonna hire new members, or what's the procedure of adding new members? Now, say you have 3 people. Is it just an easy majority, or what does it need to be super majority? How do we add people? How do we do that? That's what we want to put in there. It's just the nuts and bolts of how we want to run this business and how we want to run this entity. So let's try and go, just for the sake of time, through the business contracts. And again, a lot of what we've been talking about is what we're trying to achieve and what we're doing. What in the business are we in? So depending on what business we're in, we have to look at what contracts we would need. And some of the things that we see is people enter into contracts without any consultation whatsoever from attorneys. We have this happen all the time. They're calling us up. Oh, well, they were supposed to build a building in this form, this way, and now it looks like a house. But it was supposed to be like a gymnasium or something. And then I said, okay, so
that's a real life story. That's not made up. Yeah.
And so the question is, what was the contract? And they're like, oh, I have to look for it. I said, what? Yeah, I don't know where the contract is. I said, oh, so what did you sign? I don't know. And then they're sending me change orders, but they're not sending me the original contract that has all the basically all the governing information, everything that we need to know. And they don't have that. The same thing, it goes vice versa. If you're in the business, and like, unfortunately, I have clients that some of the clients, they're selling high ticket price items with no contract at all. One client, he sold a watch to somebody on a payment plan, and there was nothing in writing, and the guy didn't pay. And see, these are the things, like, if you're in the business where you're going to be selling a product, you want to make sure you have, especially a high-end product, you want to make sure you have a contract and you have something that you can enforce. And especially if you have one of those, like in here we said, do you want to be able to recover fees and attorney's fees in the event there's a dispute? Those are important, because if you don't have that written in a contract, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get attorney's fees at the end of the day. Depending on your claim, it may be something you can get, but it's not something that's mandatory.
Legal fees in litigation they add up very quickly. Just I'm sure Brother Ahmed and Zubair both can chime in on thousands of dollars can be spent just like that before anyone moves a finger many times. So kind of factoring those events in is very important, I think, upfront.
And then you said, do you want, maybe you don't want to have litigation, or you want to be, away from that. So then you can look at mandatory arbitration clauses. You want to do mediation, you can put those in the document. But the thing is, you have to have the contracts necessary before. You can't just expect, oh, well, we had a verbal communication and that's what we agreed upon. That's great. But when things go wrong, that's not going to be something that you're going to want to have. Siraj, can you please? So on IP, so this is something we don't really practice, but I just want to give you a general overview. It's something that's very important to be cognizant of, especially when it comes to copyrights, licenses, and trademarks. You can get yourself in hot water if you're not careful. We've had clients that had issues with copyright. They came to us that basically they had a federal lawsuit against them because they use a certain copyrighted words or copyrighted phrases, and that's what they were labeling their products as. It became a huge nightmare for them, and they had to pay. And one of the things they were asking them is, so just so you guys have an understanding of how significant it can be, is they wanted to know how much revenue they were receiving from that product, because they're going to want to go after them for that, because in their point of view, the only reason why they were getting the revenue is because of the name, because they took it from that, so it represented that it almost was like that they were selling their product. That was an issue. One of the other issues we had is with one of the clients who used a specific type of font, and that font was available for private consumer use, but if you use it on a commercial side, you'd have to get a license from them to use it. So my client got a cease and desist letter from France saying, hey, you're using this font and you shouldn't be using it. And we had to negotiate a licensing fee. So now our client has the ability to use it as much as he wants, but he has that perpetual license. But the thing is, you have to be careful, because not everybody's as nice to just say, oh, I just want I just want to have a perpetual license fee. Some of them, they may want to fight you for it, and they may want to get, they want damages and things of that nature. So be very careful with that. Don't let that be something that, can cause an issue for you.
So I think I can pick up from here. We have a few minutes left. But Ahmed, do you want to give a few minutes for questions, or do you want us? We have maybe one or two more slides. How do you want to do this?
Please proceed with the slides. I've asked them for questions, and
Okay.
I would, in the absence of questions, I will let you finish, and then I'll ask some questions myself.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. So once you're every business has a life cycle, right? So we talked about getting your business started, choosing the right structure, making sure that there are you have the naming right, we have the appropriate documents. Now we are actually in business. And what I've noticed many times is that many times when we start a new business, we get so busy just in the day-to-day operations, making sure that we can pay the bills to keep the lights on, to feed our family, to do whatever we do in our business. And many times it's easy to overlook some of the day-to-day compliance issues which come up in any business. For example, making sure your quarterly taxes are paid if you have to pay quarterly taxes, making sure that if you need a sales license, your license is up to date. If you're in a professional field, that you have to keep continuing education active. So those are some things which we've noticed that as people, they get busier and busier, and business grows, mashallah, that's a good thing. It's easy to overlook mundane housekeeping things within a business, and those are things which it's important to keep a tab on, making sure that as we mentioned, taxes are paid timely, because an organization you don't want to ever upset is the IRS or your state taxation authority, because they will come after you at some point with the full authority of the law behind their back, and they have vast powers to place liens, to repossess. So just making sure that those things are taken care of. And another thing which I've noticed is that many times when we get into business, it's easy to kind of think in a silo. And I'm sure Ahmed and Zubair, they've noticed that too, that we get so drawn into what we're doing, we fail to realize that there are there's networking opportunities, there's trade organizations, and those really help for a variety of reasons. One, it helps with making sure that we kind of are in line with what everyone else in our industry is doing. It's a good support structure. It keeps us abreast on what to be aware of in the upcoming environments or whatever. So, and generally speaking, this compliance matter, while it's not something thought of a lot, we see businesses getting tripped up there on a regular basis. So it's just something to keep in mind, and to have kind of have a pulse on, to make sure that no one falls behind on that. So I think we can go to the next slide. Right. So the road ahead, and this is I think one of our last few slides. And in this, it's I think from the beginning, what we've been talking about is that one of the reasons why people spend time and they spend resources and they think a lot about what business structure they want to form is because they want to make sure that their business life, their business finances does not become commingled, or they're separate entities. Your business is separate than your personal life, right? And that's hugely important. And many times, particularly in small businesses, and we're first starting off, if money's tight, it's easy for people to kind of not follow protocol and transfer money willy-nilly between a personal account and a business account, or a business account and a personal account, and vice versa. And what that does is that gives the appearance to the world, essentially, that this business is not really a legitimate business. It's just a front for personal endeavors. So God forbid if someone ever gets sued and it's shown in court or at any point that the business structure was not kept separate of the personal side, it becomes easier for a judge to basically say that the business and the person is one. So all of those assets become liable to be, liable in a lawsuit. So it's important to have that organizational structure in place to make sure that all our business have accurate records. For example, if we're trying to expense things out, we keep receipts, we keep accurate records, so that if a question ever comes up later on down the road, it's clear that everything we did in the course of our business was a legitimate business expense, and we have the proof, the receipts. Is showing the receipts, right? We have the receipts to back it up, and that's hugely important. And Zubair, if you want to chime in, that's something that we see oftentimes arise, is that people, for example, they might go to Starbucks every day and expense it out, right? Just willy-nilly. And number one, that can make other partners upset. But another thing is that legitimate business expenses should be treated as legitimate business expenses, and it's not a piggy bank to fund whatever our personal hobbies or whatever our personal proclivities are. Do you guys want to add anything on that, Zubair?
No, just kind of to echo what Siraj had mentioned. Yeah, you don't want to be using it as your personal piggy bank. If you're using your debit card for your business and you're going to Walmart, you're going to Target, you're going to Trader Joe's, you're basically doing everything on your business card and trying to run that as an expense. You're gonna basically blur your lines. If you're doing your Starbucks every day and you're eating out, yeah, there may be certain legitimate business expenses in that. But if you're going to continue down that pattern where you're just commingling those funds and you just basically, the best way to use it is if you're using your business as your personal piggy bank, that's going to get you in trouble, and that's going to kind of blur that shield that we're talking about, where you lifted up this protection with these business entities to protect yourself from liability. You're basically putting all those defenses down, because what you're doing is basically saying, no, this is really not a business entity, this is just me funding my own personal benefits.
And yes, so carry on, Zubair. I think we can
yeah, so just about, and then I guess we are touching on potential lawsuits. Should we be concerned about that? Yes, absolutely, because unfortunately, like with anything else, things can happen and things do happen. And then what do you do if you get sued? The best thing you do is find competent counsel and get good legal advice. And I think we kind of touched on this again, the road to investors and investment. And these are those things that we wanted to bring up again, because while you're thinking about it in the beginning, remember you had the foresight to think that, yes, we're going to have investors. Yes, we're going to need investment later on. And depending on your business structure, it will help you achieve those goals in an easier fashion and not make it as complicated. Legal counsel.
Okay, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is just basically thing. Do we need legal counsel? Is it important to have legal counsel? And the one thing that sometimes people, they get upset, when they see how much an attorney charges for certain things. But you have to realize that there's a lot of skill and expertise that comes with that advice. And when you get competent legal counsel, it helps set things up for you. And it helps kind of give you a good understanding of where you're going and where you need to be. And that's why we always recommend to have sit down with an attorney, even though it may feel like a lot in the beginning, but it does set out a good path forward for you. Because a lot of the times we see people that they tend to do things themselves, and they end up in positions where they're in hot water because they just wanted to do something really fast or cut a corner real quick. But a lot of the times that does catch up to you. And especially you don't want to do that when it comes with multiple people involved. We've seen this all too well, where you have a group of friends or a group of people that were very close. They started a business, had no agreement whatsoever. And at the end of the day, they don't talk to each other anymore. And the thing is that if you had proper legal advice in the beginning and a proper legal setup, everybody would know where they needed to be, and they would know, okay, this is how we need to do things. And you also get advice on risk aversion of what, like we talked about with insurance, what do you particularly need? Should I get this type of insurance? Do I need that? Do I need this? Reviewing contracts is key. Like I said, a lot of the times we see people that they don't even look at it at all. And at the end of the day, they're upset. Okay, well, this was what he told me. And when it's not reflected on that piece of paper that they signed, they're like, well, he told me that. A lot of the times what he told you does not make a difference, because what's written on the paper is what's going to govern. Yeah, and a lot of the times you can prevent and resolve litigation through attorneys. We do a lot of work where people get sued and we step in the beginning and we come to resolutions. That's a lot of some of the work that we do, is that, it can just take a phone call from your counsel to opposing counsel, say, hey, look, how can we get this matter resolved? and then we can do that. And that sometimes
as long as there's many, the earlier, generally speaking, not all litigation gets resolved early, but many times the earlier lawyers reach out to and a resolution can go down the roads of resolution, that that saves a lot of stress for a lot of people. I don't know if anyone's ever been involved in litigation, but for those people involved, it's hugely stressful because the legal process, it intimidates people, and also it's just so expensive. But the costs are a huge consideration that many people overlook. Is that if a simple defense on a lawsuit, if there's no insurance, it could easily go $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 very easily if it's not resolved earlier on. So waiting and hoping things kind of go away when you're in trouble, it doesn't always go away. It just kind of piles on. So sometimes facing the reality early on is the more prudent option.
Through this moment, if anybody has any questions, please do bring them up to chat. And with the few moments that I have left, you've spent a good deal of time on the business creation side. So I wanted to ask a question on that. There are a lot of CPAs who offer business formation services. They'll do it as a service together with giving the advice on the taxes that goes into it. Obviously, you weren't providing tax advice or anyone's specific legal advice, just education. Can you speak as to a reason why they would want to hire an attorney either to do the formation instead of the CPA or together with the CPA?
We see this often. You see this often. We always
all the time,
struggle
right?
with this. Yeah,
I see it all the time. And what I say is, when a CPA does their formation, they do it for their more for the tax benefits that you can reap. They don't really know the liability side of things as much. So when they advise you on the tax side. And while we do see CPAs that do file entities, we do find that there is potential issues when they do that. This happens fairly common with us. So I've had several phone calls with CPAs where they're advising clients to do X, Y, and Z, and I'm asking them, okay, what's the reasoning behind it? And the reasoning is flawed from a liability point of view. It may make sense for them tax-wise, and but it doesn't make sense from a liability standpoint. So what I generally recommend is do it in conjunction with a CPA. A CPA can advise on the tax benefits and consequences, but they're not really licensed or have the know-how as far as liability and what's going to protect you the most. And so that's why I say kind of stick to that sort of framework where the attorney is going to be able to protect you and the CPA is going to help you, especially with taxes are concerned.
Great.
But whenever we do see CPAs doing things, many times we have questions which arise, which we have to go back to the CPA and be like, why'd you do it like this? And then we kind of remind them that we don't give tax advice. It's kind of a good idea to let us give the legal advice and not, offer legal advice based off of what you've heard or what makes sense at that particular time if the training isn't there.
And I will say, and I'm sure you guys can disagree with me or not, just because our speakers today didn't give a lot of emphasis to intellectual property, it's not either on my part or NYCMC Business Incubator's part or their part, I'm sure, intending to de-emphasize it. For many, many businesses, it is a huge part of your business. It is the biggest asset you will come up with, whether a patent, copyright, trademark. It is really important. So please do not take any lack of attention or the less attention given to it as an indication that we feel it's not important.
It's hugely important. And if you have an idea or you have some trademark, it's important to be on top of it, do due diligence, make sure that it's something which is trademarkable or patentable, and spending the necessary resources and time on it, because that can be a huge resource for you down the road. So if you're in those industries or in that field, it's something which needs to be almost as important as corporate structure and how you want to handle the intellectual property from the get-go.
Yeah, thank you. So with that, thank you, brothers, for presenting today. Next week, as I said, we have on November 17th, Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, we have Muhammad Buddha speaking on how to get funding, get the money. He's a founder and CEO of Minaret Building Company and Real Estate Mogul Group. So inshallah, we'll see you then. Look for your email for the link to that session, 6 p.m. on Tuesday. And with that, we will conclude.
Are there any questions that came up in the chat?
There are literally no questions.
Oh, okay. If you have any questions, you can go ask Brother Ahmed, and if he can forward them to us if they come up.
I'll be happy to forward
later
them
on.
over.
Or Brother Ahmed also, he can answer just as well as we can. So
Incubator at NYCMuslimCenter.org for any questions that you want to forward to the speakers. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa la sirrin an sana la fi khusrin alladhina amanu wa salihati wa tawas bil haqq wa tawas bis sabr. Assalamu alaikum. Good night.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.